So today we're going to talk about sensation authenticity, or the ESFP type. This is also known as the performer. But before we really launch into sensation authenticity genius, I'd just like to make a note about who I'm talking to in this webinar. I'm talking to three different kinds of people. The first kind of person I'm talking to is the ESFP, or the sensation authenticity person themselves. The people who have this as their genius and want to get to know themselves a little bit more, want to get to know how they operate a little bit better. The second type of person I'm talking to are friends and family members of this type. Friends and family members that are interested in knowing how to communicate better, how to understand how this type works a little better. And the third type of person I'm talking to are people who are getting to know all personality types and just want to go down the rabbit hole a little further on this particular type. Now, if I go in between different words to indicate who I'm talking to, sometimes I'll be saying the word you to indicate people who have this as their genius. Sometimes I'll be saying the word they to indicate I'm talking to people who are getting to know this type. So if I go in and out of these words, that's totally normal because I'm actually talking to a broader audience. But let's start by really launching into how people who have the sensation authenticity genius really work. All right, so as an overview of all the types, ESFPs are the most lighthearted and driven to the pleasures of life. At their best, this type is the life of the party, the workplace, or whatever other context they're in, wherever else they frequent. They have a natural talent for pleasing people, and they find themselves as entertainers quite often. They're usually, again, the life of the party. They're often the first to tell the latest jokes or share the coming trend. They usually have their finger on the pulse of new trends. People of this type refuse to let anything become too sacred or too serious, and they are extremely generous. What's theirs is yours. They're very much generous, give the shirt off their back type of people. They're easy to please, and they generally find careers that satisfy them due to being both practical and positive. So the ESFP, or the sensation authenticity genius, is generally a very positive, optimistic type. So that's an overview, but let's talk about who's in the car. Now, this webinar is a companion to your PDF profile. And if you're of this type and have the profile in front of you, I highly recommend referencing it as we go through which mental processes, or which, quote unquote, the technical term is cognitive functions, are most influencing you as the sensation authenticity style. Now, the driver process, or the mental process that this style is leading with, is a process called sensation, or technically called extroverted sensing. This is the style that this type is the most identified with. If you were to ask an ESFP to describe themselves, they would probably spend about 80% of their time describing this mental process. So this is very much how they identify themselves, and very much a big piece of their identity. This is supplemented with the co-pilot. So that's the driver process. Sensation is the driver process. It's supplemented with the co-pilot, or the navigation process of authenticity, which is technically called introverted feeling. And when these two processes are being used together, this is when this type is at their best. Now, in the back of the car, directly behind the authenticity process, is what we call the 10-year-old process, and it's the opposite of the co-pilot. This is technically called extroverted thinking, which makes sense because it's the opposite of introverted feeling or authenticity. And then behind the sensation process is the 3-year-old. And if sensation as the driver is extroverted sensing, then its opposite would be introverted intuition, also known as perspectives. Okay, so what do these 4 mental processes do for this type? Well, sensation lives in the now. Sensation is very much being in your body. It's being in the current experience, living right here and now, being very much attached to your first person experience in life. And so sensation people have a talent for being what is technically called being here now. not missing anything as it's going on around them, being very present to the moment. They also have a talent for real world physics. Now, this makes sense. If you are very much in tune with your body, with all of your senses beyond just the five, right? Because there's other senses like time and temperature, balance. If you are in tune with all of those senses all the time, it makes sense that you would over time build the skill for real world physics. You would see how instruments and how tools interrelate with each other. You kind of have an eye for balance, and you just become very good at getting how objects in the world relate to each other. And sensation people are very realistic and observant. Very little is missed by people of this type because their eyes, ears, etc. are always open for new stimuli, for new information. And this also makes them very realistic because they get how the world works. They're observing it all the time. And so they become very grounded and realistic when they're using this function. Now, again, this is very much about being inside your body. It's very kinesthetic. People of this type end up becoming really in tune with how their body is responding and reacting to things. They oftentimes see tools or instruments as just extensions of their body. So they become very good at using tools. They become very good at becoming craftspeople, at becoming artists, at becoming musicians, cooking. Anything that utilizes their senses and has them be really very much a part of that kinesthetic experience of living in the here and now and utilizing all of those senses. Now, this is supplemented, and for the record, sensation is what we call a learning process or an understanding process. Most people who have this learn best when they're rolling up their sleeves and getting into action. They are hands-on learners. If you force them to sit down at a desk and just listen to information by rote, they will get restless very quickly because they need to be touching what's going on. They need to be getting into action. They're very tactile. So if you are a sensation authenticity person who had trouble while you're growing up learning new information, or maybe you had some problems in school, it's not uncommon. It's usually because you were ready to get into action and you were told to sit down at your desk and be quiet, which is difficult for a sensation person to do. So they generally have extremely high kinesthetic intelligence that oftentimes goes unappreciated. And it's kind of a tragedy, actually. And if you're a sensation person, you probably really resonate with that you have very high body intelligence and most people don't really understand it or they don't really appreciate it. Now, because this is a learning process, this is how you understand new information, and because it's extroverted, which helps you get into the outside world and get that quote-unquote real-world feedback, you need to be balanced with something that helps you get inside of yourself or something that helps you get introverted, and by balancing yourself with a decision-making process. So if you only ever use sensation, you're going to be exploring the world, but never actually coming to any conclusions. You'll just be interacting with the world. So you need to balance it out with something that helps you get inside of yourself and something that helps you make decisions. And that's what the co-pilot or the authenticity process does for you. So let's describe this a little bit. Authenticity has a natural interest in ethics, all right? This is whether or not something is good or bad. And the reason for this is authenticity people, they're really in touch with how things make them feel. This is technically introverted feeling. So you know that if you have an experience where somebody does something to you in this one context and it makes you feel one way, and then the exact same person does the exact same thing to you in a different context and it makes you feel different, right? Maybe one felt good and one felt bad. The natural question is, what is a good or a bad action? If this made me feel good in this situation, but it made me feel bad in this situation, then how can you define a good or a bad action? And this is what authenticity people are very interested in. what defines good and bad, what defines good and evil. So they have a very natural interest in ethics, and they tend to have a lot of distinctions around good and bad things. They tend to get very sophisticated with their ability to sort of think of things in ethical terms. This is also about seeking a balance in life. A lot of times we call it inner alignment. So with this natural interest in ethics also comes with being very sensitive to how you're responding to a situation before you're taking an action. So are you supposed to be taking this action in this situation? And authenticity people go inside themselves and sort of listen to all those voices inside that are weighing the circumstance, weighing the situation, weighing the action. And when all of those voices are in agreement, or your inner world is in alignment, that's when you know this is the right action to take for you. And this is often about seeking balance. This is often about making sure that you are doing the right thing, that feels ethically right for you. You could almost call it conscience. And because you are so in tune with how things are making you feel, there's a saying that goes, the more personal an experience is, the more universal it is. So people of this type, because they are so in tune with how things make them feel on a personal level, they instinctively know that other people are probably going through similar situations. And so they get this really strong pulse on what people need in order to feel good. This is not necessarily a matter of empathizing, but it's more like sympathizing. It's more like, I get how I would feel in this situation, so you're probably feeling the same way. And if this is something that would make me feel bad, it's probably something that's going to make you feel bad as well. Now, when these two parts of your mind are working well together, this is when you are at your best. Not only are you really grounded and really good at getting out into the world, not only you're really good about sort of understanding how the world reacts and responds to itself, but you also are very much in touch with how you feel and what you believe is right. You also are in touch with how other people feel. So this is where the performer element comes in. You're really good at interacting with the outside world. You're probably extremely good at improvising. And then you also know how to maybe make subtle tweaks in what you're saying or what you're doing to get other people to respond in a certain emotional way, right? And that's what art is all about. It's about communicating emotions through nonverbal ways. And that looks like performance, right? It could be dance, it could be acting, it could be music, whatever it is. It could be comedy. Whatever it is, you are helping other people replicate an emotion by understanding how people feel and respond emotionally to different situations. And so when you put these two things together, you get the consummate performer. And most people of this type will say that they feel the best when they're in a performance role. They feel really good when they've got all eyes on them and they're kind of bringing people along for sort of this ride. They're helping people feel good, or they're helping people respond, emotionally to a situation that they feel strongly about. It's very much when this sensation authenticity genius is at its best. Okay, so let's talk about the back seat, all right? The two quote unquote people in the back seat, the 10-year-old and the 3-year-old. And before I launch into this, I just want to make a note that these are not bad parts of you, all right? They're not bad or wrong or evil, and you don't want to shut them away. They are simply less sophisticated parts of your mind. And that means that they can trip you up sometimes. Since they're not as sophisticated, since you're not as aged or skilled, then if you utilize them in important times to make big decisions or to, really deal with a situation, you're going to find yourself acting like a little kid. If, however, you utilize them in a more balanced way, in the way that they're supposed to be used, then you'll see that they actually bring a lot to your world. They really actually help flesh out your world. And they do that in a couple different ways. So we'll talk about that. Now let's go to the opposite of authenticity. Let's talk about effectiveness, which is the 10-year-old in your car. And if authenticity is introverted feeling, then its exact opposite would be extroverted thinking. So this shows up for you in some good and some bad ways, but we'll talk about sort of the ways that it can trip you up first. Now, effectiveness is all about getting an objective accomplished. And when people of this type use effectiveness, what it usually looks like is manipulation. So sensation wants to do something, all right? Sensation wants to maybe have a very visceral or self-indulgent experience. It's trying to get something done that'll make it feel good. And instead of checking in with authenticity, which it's supposed to do, right? As the co-pilot or as the navigator, authenticity is supposed to inform whether or not this is the good or bad thing for you to do, right? It might give you pleasant sensations, but it might be an ethically wrong choice for you. When people of this type use effectiveness, what they do is they basically skip authenticity altogether. They just don't even listen to it. And they go straight to effectiveness to try to figure out how to make this happen. And a lot of times it looks very manipulative. It looks like coercion. It's doing anything it can to get this accomplished. Now, the reason why sensation people go to effectiveness is, if you notice, sensation is an extroverted process, whereas authenticity, its balance, is an introverted process. So sensation likes to get into the outside world and interact with the outside world, but authenticity is quiet. It's more about contemplation and getting inside of yourself. But if you notice, effectiveness goes back to being extroverted. And all of us have a desire to stay in the world that our driver process occupies. So since effectiveness is also extroverted, the big temptation is to skip the introverted process, which would be a check and balance system for us, right? It would tell us whether or not we were doing something that feels good to us on the inside or feels right, and go straight to effectiveness to try to figure out how to make this happen. And when a person of this style just uses sensation and effectiveness back and forth and gets caught into this sort of loop, usually what you see is a con man. An example of this would be sort of the pickup artist who, a guy who just wants to get laid that night and goes into a club and does whatever he can, manipulates however he can to get a woman in bed that night. That's very much how sensation and effectiveness can work together. Whereas authenticity, if this person checked in with authenticity and asked himself, okay, so is this really what I want to be doing? Do I feel like this is the right choice to make, to manipulate somebody into bed? Now, authenticity might say, yeah, go for it. Have at it. It's no problem with me. Or it might go, maybe I shouldn't be manipulating people into my bed. Maybe I should be a little bit more conscientious of the impact this will have on both myself and the other person. So that's an example of how this type can basically go to a 10-year-old to help make its decisions for it. And obviously that's not as sophisticated. And whoever you are, you're probably thinking of times when you have manipulated, coerced, maybe forced yourself into a situation that you wanted, right? And you were just looking for ways to confirm that this was okay and this was the right decision to make, and then pushed your way into getting it, only to realize later that that was not something that was in alignment with your values. Effectiveness is also very much demanding of other people when it's not well developed. And so an ESFP can be very demanding of other people if they're not checking in with authenticity and going, okay, so maybe I should be working with this person as opposed to demanding of them. So obviously for both of these situations, being manipulative and being demanding, the antidote is to get out of effectiveness and to get into authenticity. Authenticity is how you know what you're doing is the right choice to make. It's the right action to take. And so anytime you feel yourself doing this, and you know that this always makes you feel bad later, and if it doesn't, it should, right? The antidote is, as soon as you recognize this happening, force yourself to get into that authenticity place. And your PDF profile should have specific exercises on how to build that skill. Now, in a positive way, effectiveness enjoys being productive. It enjoys work and productivity. And this type can actually avoid the struggles that other P or perceiver types have in this area. So you're an ESFP, right? P stands for perceiver. And a lot of the other types that are perceiver types have trouble getting things done. They have trouble sort of getting into production and really making things happen. Whereas people of this type, sometimes they struggle with it, but when they really have developed effectiveness to a good place, they're actually very good at getting things done. And you'll find yourself feeling better when you've accomplished things through the day. Now, you can also use this in play. Effectiveness is a 10-year-old process for you. And what are 10-year-olds best at? They're best at playing, right? So you'll see people of this type, particularly males, really get into sports, right? Or they might really enjoy playing sports. This is the females too. They might really enjoy playing sports or really enjoy being athletic. They might be somebody who really enjoys working out and setting personal goals for their body. And this is a way that they play. This is a great way for them to get this effectiveness process being utilized, but without relying on it to be making major decisions. All right. And now let's go to the 3-year-old process. All right. The 3-year-old process is the exact opposite of your driver. So if your driver is sensation or extroverted sensing, that would make your 3-year-old introverted intuition, also known as perspectives. So how does this show up for people of your type? Now, remember, this is a 3-year-old process for you, so it tends to be a blind spot. Whereas effectiveness as a 10-year-old is, that's a part of you can kind of identify with. You kind of know when you're using that. You kind of get when, this is when you do, you use effectiveness in this way, and you can kind of recognize it and go, yeah, you're right. That's kind of how I'm using it. I can be demanding, or I've been manipulative in the past, or yeah, you're right. I really enjoy setting personal goals for myself and getting them accomplished. The 3-year-old process, on the other hand, is an unconscious process for you. It is basically happening without your awareness of it, and it is the part of you that you least identify with, which makes it in some ways the most dangerous because it's still there, right? It's still impacting and influencing you, but you're not aware of it. So let's talk about how that can be good and bad. Now, we go to our 3-year-old process when our driver process is overtaxed. And that can happen when we're trying to solve a problem that the sensation process is just not the right tool for the job. Now, we solve all of our problems with our driver process, right? That's how we experience most of the world. And so if you're trying to solve a problem that sensation cannot solve, what happens is it's almost like you've put the gas pedal to the floor, but you're in neutral. You've just over-revved your engine and you need a brake. Now, the brain knows that the best way to give sensation a break is to go into the perspectives process, right? To turn one on, you turn the other one off, and vice versa. Or to turn one off, you turn the other one on. So to turn sensation off, your brain goes, oh, I'll kick perspectives on, and I'll give sensation a break, which is an incredible mechanism, really. It's kind of astonishing that the brain knows to do that. But unfortunately, in this kind of situation, there's 2 things that can go really wrong, or 2 reasons why this can go very wrong. Number 1, you're already stressed out, right? And number 2, you've got a 3-year-old driving the car now because your perspectives process is about 3 years old. So a stressed out 3-year-old is now driving your car. And that's why this can turn really disastrous. What are some of the ways that looks? Well, when you've really hit a wall and you are super stressed out, people of this type tend to get paranoid, all right? They start wondering what other people are thinking of them. Because perspectives is all about getting outside of your mind and getting inside other people's brains, right? Getting inside other people's perspectives, really knowing how they think. But because you are so much better about being inside your body and responding and improvising in the moment, perspectives is not something, it's not a skill you've been developing or building. You chose sensation because that just felt more natural to you. So what happens when you do perspective or get inside somebody else's framework or mind, you tend to get a little paranoid. You tend to attribute bad intentions to other people. You start thinking, well, maybe they're talking about me, or maybe this person did this because, they were trying to get back at so-and-so. It's usually almost always in a negative connotation when you speculate on how another person is thinking. And this paranoia can get bigger. It can become a paranoia about the future, right? Like bad things are about to happen to me. Or it can be a paranoia about an institution like a government. That's less common, but it's not completely outside the realm of, of the type. The type can sometimes become very suspicious of institutions, schools or the government or whatever. And so this is very common when this type comes under stress, that the perspectives process ends up being sort of, really paranoid and believes that bad things are coming. However, the mechanism is good, like I mentioned, right? Like you do want to give sensation a break sometimes. You just don't want it to be happening to you. You want to control the mechanism. And if you get into the perspectives process for about 30 minutes when you're really stressed out, oftentimes that's long enough for your sensation process to have like some downtime, right? It chills out for a while. The thing is that you don't want it to kind of automatically happen because that's when you get paranoid. Instead of letting the 3-year-old drive the car, we recommend that you pull the car over to the side of the road and let the 3-year-old get out and run around a tree for a while. And the way that happens is for you, your perspectives process is introverted. That means that you need some quiet time, some quiet downtime all by yourself. And if you feel yourself getting really stressed out, one of the best ways to deal with that is to go be alone and de-stress through meditation or other stimulus-free relaxation, like a nap or a very simple meditation. Basically, you want to be shutting off that sensation process that's all about sensory stimuli. You want to shut that off as cleanly as possible. You want to get to as quiet a place as you possibly can. And so we highly recommend that when you find yourself getting super duper stressed, just go, look, I'm checking out for about 30 minutes. Go find an incredibly quiet, possibly dark place, or a very soothing, relaxing, maybe very clean, cleanly decorated room, something that has a very clean aesthetic, and just quiet your mind, right? Just kind of go inside your mind and just do a very simple meditation or relaxation technique. That, after about 20 or 30 minutes, will have your sensation process really, really rested, and then you can get back out there and try to solve that problem again. Now, this won't feel natural to you because you're using a process that is not natural to you. Or I mean, it's natural, but not in a skilled way. It's your 3-year-old process. It's your blind spot. So it's not going to feel good the first couple times you do it, but after a while, you'll really see its benefits. So I highly recommend trying that. Now, another way that we use our perspectives process or our 3-year-old process is as what we call our aspiration, right? It becomes sort of the way that we set our life goal. And the reason why our 3-year-old becomes our aspiration is that oftentimes we have a problem that other types would be using, in your case, the perspectives process to solve. But because the perspectives process is a blind spot for you, you tend to not be able to solve this problem. And when you finally are able to solve it, usually you do it in a creative way that includes both your driver and your co-pilot. So in your case, the sensation and authenticity processes will come together. And when you solve this problem, you get really excited and you want to share it with other people, and it becomes sort of the aspiration of your life. And in your case, what this can oftentimes look like is that this is how you set your plan for your life, basically a plan for stability. And you oftentimes do that by figuring out what means something to you using your authenticity process. So you figure out what's authentic to you, what feels right to you, and you set a path and you use your talents to basically plan for stability in your life. And that's how you use perspectives, which is a process that really thinks very far into the future. That's how you use that as your aspiration. That's all very positive, and we highly recommend that you do that. All right, let's talk about this type in relationships. This type always brings fun and adventure into a relationship, and they connect with others through humor and a positive mood. So feeling good, right? They connect with other people by having shared experiences that feel really positive, and they're usually optimistic. if a person of this type is not optimistic, that is oftentimes a sign of depression. So if you're married to this type or mated, if your mate has this type, if you have a friend or family member that's of this type and they are not optimistic and regularly in a positive mood, they are probably going through some form of depression. And that's something to look out for. And if you are of this type, you are usually in a very good mood. You're usually highly optimistic. So if you find yourself getting really pessimistic or cynical, maybe some life changes need to be made. Maybe you need to take a really hard look at your life and figure out why you're kind of down. If you're in a relationship with this type and they are in a good place, you know what we're talking about when we say that they have fun and bring adventure to the relationship, which is great for both parties. They're really spontaneous and very much willing to go with the flow. Usually they're up for anything, which makes them ideal, travel buddies. It makes them ideal travel buddies through life, really. They're just really go with the flow and, again, extremely generous. However, one thing to look out for is that this type oftentimes has little or no concept of moderation or planning ahead. And that can cause financial problems or sometimes issues with addiction. So because sensation is all about a visceral experience, sometimes they'll overindulge that need to have a visceral experience. And this can lead to maybe some, over shopping, or it can lead to wanting to do, these sort of pie in the sky entrepreneurial dreams. Not to say that they shouldn't be entrepreneurs. I personally believe that everybody should have an entrepreneurial experience in life. And I'm an entrepreneur, so I'm a serial entrepreneur. So there's not downing that at all. But doing so without proper planning can create some financial problems in the family. And then addiction. Addiction is something that a lot of people of this type struggle with because they are about the visceral experience. They're about pleasure. So the big question that a person of this type needs to ask themselves is, it feels and seems fun now, but how fun are the consequences? This means a little bit of foresight, which is not something that you're usually really good at. So what really needs to happen here is, instead of planning for the future, generally what we recommend this type do is go access their authenticity process and make sure that you've really thought about the ethical implications of your actions. Okay, what feels right to you? And I don't mean like feels good, right? We're not talking about what feels good, because what feels good is usually an indulgence. We're talking about what feels right. We're talking about your conscience. So make sure that you've really developed that authenticity part of you into a strong conscience, so that when you are in a situation where maybe you're going to take an action that you shouldn't and you shouldn't, but you're going to go ahead and do it anyway because it feels good, make sure that you've developed that muscle that goes, you know what? That's not me, right? I am not in alignment with my values if I do this. This is not part of how I see myself. This is not my identity to take this action. And then you'll find yourself having a lot less trouble with addiction or creating these financial problems, because you can become identified with somebody who takes care of their family, right? Like, I'm not going to run ahead and take these major, financial risks and put my family in jeopardy. Generally, this is not the most organized type, all right? So this type doesn't struggle as much with getting things done as other P types do, but they can be pretty disorganized, and they tend to have messy houses and don't really care that much for keeping a structured space. That's usual. That is the norm for people of this type. There is an exception, though, and that's when this type is raised in a very organized house and they've integrated cleanliness with their authenticity process or with their identity. Think of authenticity and identity as being very closely linked. So if they see themselves as an organized person, if they basically say phrases like, that's the kind of person I am, I just want things to be organized, then they'll be a lot more clean and organized. And if you're struggling with this, if you're an ESFP or a sensation authenticity person, and you're really struggling to keep your house clean or structured, that's the answer. The answer is to see yourself or become the kind of person who keeps their house in order. Another part of this is you are a sensation driver, and that means you're very sensitive to aesthetics, right? Like you know when things look good and when things don't look good. So jump into cleaning and organizing with the flavor of, this needs to look good for me to feel sated. For me to feel good, this needs to look good. And really get into maybe decorating your space, making it your own, putting all these pieces of flair that really speak to other people about who you are through your decorating style or your aesthetic. And that will help you very much keep your space clean and structured. So a great part about this type is that they're very adaptable and they seek win-wins. This is one of the things that makes them so delightful, especially in relationships. They just really want to have a good time, and they will enjoy doing your favorite activities. So if you're in a relationship with this type, try not to take too much advantage of this. Try to make sure that you're being conscientious of, pursuing their interests as well, because they are pretty adaptable and pretty much open for anything. But that desire to seek win-wins is truly delightful. And if you are this type and you are not seeking win-wins, it means something's probably not, something in your life is probably going wrong. Again, if you're not being optimistic, if you're not seeking win-wins, you probably have some depression going on. And that's something that can be handled in a number of ways, but really have your finger on the pulse of how you're responding to these things, because your type should be very fun-loving, should be very much living to the fullest, and make sure that you're bringing that to a relationship. Make sure you're bringing that really great part of who you are to all of your relationships. So let's talk about this type in business. People of this type tend to prefer careers that engage both their body and their social aptitude. That makes sense, right? They've got a lot of skill developed around their body and around, using tools and utilizing instruments. So it makes sense that they prefer careers that would engage their body and get them into action. And they also are very good with people. So you'll see this type in sales positions. You'll see them in different artistic positions. Sometimes they're really good at, being sort of tour guides for the world. Actually, they're very good at being tour guides in whatever capacity that they can play that out. So they like to prefer careers that engage their body, get them into action, and allow them to work with people. They usually have a desire to make their communities better. And they'll they quite often seek socially beneficial employment. So you'll see them in, maybe religious ministries, or you'll see them in community service positions, because they really have a desire to make things better. And that goes back to their authenticity process, doing the thing that makes sense to them and feels right internally. They usually prefer to deal directly with people, and they don't like to do supportive administrative work. So they're a get things going interactive style. They're usually sort of that fiery energy that comes in and makes people excited about doing something. And so they're best paired with a behind the scenes type, somebody who's willing to do sort of all that, thankless behind the scenes work. And the ISFJ type is the ESFP power pair. So ISFJ is the memory harmony style, and they're very much a behind-the-scenes type. They're very much a supporter role. So when these two get together, usually great things happen. They're usually very good employees and employers, but they do have a tendency to burn out if they don't slow down. So take care of yourself. Take care of your health. Get plenty of sleep. Eat well, exercise, and don't burn yourself out through too much activity, because you'll really throw yourself into a project, and even though you're very good at being sensitive to how your body is responding to things, you have more energy than most people do. And so if you get into that flow state, sometimes you can kind of burn yourself out through too much activity. So make sure that you're doing a lot of maintenance, a lot of taking care of your physical needs. This type oftentimes has difficulty working alone. So make sure that you are doing work in groups, or at least around other people regularly throughout the day in order to be productive. If you have to work 100% on your own and you get no interactive time at all with anybody else, eventually, maybe not in the first week or so, but eventually you'll get very tired out. You need people around you to provide that stimuli. The one exception to this is if you're working alone and you're doing an extremely physical activity. So like I know people of this type that are loggers and they work alone, but they are totally in nature. They're working with big power tools, and that's very rewarding for them. So if you do have to work alone, make sure that you're really super in action and interacting with your environment. But if you have to work in a cubicle all by yourself day in, day out, that will become very depressing to you. And I'm sure you know that about yourself. You are probably really good at aesthetically oriented tasks. People of this type usually have a very artistic eye, regardless of they're male or female. They usually are very good at seeing how things sort of make other people respond to them. They're very good at art and making things look good. So that can be anything from acting to construction to being a tattoo artist. As long as, again, they're engaging their body, they're in their body when they're working, and they have a social component to it, and usually performance is the best, they are very happy with their careers. So what are some of the best practices for ESFPs? Exercise the authenticity process, okay? So that authenticity co-pilot or the navigator in your car, think of them as having a map in front of them. Sensation might be doing the driving, but authenticity is helping guide the way. So get that skill, get that talent really exercised, build it up like a muscle. And if you do, you'll find that your body enjoys what's healthy for it. Okay, so authenticity will help you determine what is healthy for it and to actually enjoy what's healthy for it. You're eager to stimulate your senses, but authenticity will inform you when to pass. And it will get really kind of addicted to feeling healthy, not to just feeling pleasure, but to feeling healthy. And authenticity helps you determine what those healthy actions are. It also helps you solve problems that require critical decision making. So you're not big on, contemplating. You're not big on sitting down and sort of contemplating sort of the meaning of the universe as much. That's usually not your shtick. You're usually far better at getting into action. But when you have a serious decision to make, it's not going to be difficult to make if you strive to be in alignment with your values. So when you do have quiet time, get inside of who you are, get inside of yourself, and determine what do you stand for as a person? What are your ethics? What are your core values? And so when you're in the moment, and as an improviser, as somebody spontaneous, you're probably going to be running into situations where, you don't even know how you got there, but all of a sudden you're here, and now you have a big critical life choice to make. If you are in touch with your core values, you will know the right actions to take because you will know what defines you and does not define you in your actions. So learn how to fire friends. This is a big one. Everyone loves that you're so generous, but not everyone respects your boundaries. High quality relationships are the key to happiness for your type. So learn how to fire friends. What does that mean? That means if you've got a friendship that is toxic to you, if you've got a friendship that is unhealthy, learn how to get out of that situation. Learn how to remove yourself from that friendship. It's called firing friends. And people will gravitate towards you. You're fun-loving, you're interesting, you love getting into action, you're very spontaneous, you're also very much go with the flow, and you're a performer, right? What's not to love about that combination? You're going to just really attract people like crazy. And some of those people will not be respecting your boundaries, all right? Some of them will kind of become sort of these energy leeches, and you've got to learn how to fire them. You've got to learn how to protect your boundaries, and one of the great ways to do that, again, is authenticity, all right? What are your boundaries? What do you stand for? And once you've got that piece down, you will find yourself creating high-quality relationships that will very much contribute to the happiness of your life. And for God's sake, get some sleep, all right? This is a big one. Take care of your body. You will be a higher energy sort of junkie, right? You love getting inside your body. You love sensory pleasure. You love go, go, go. But a big thing is making sure that you're taking care of your health. So get that piece under control if you haven't already. Now, a lot of people of your type get that piece under control by first starting out with exercise. They get really good at being in an exercise routine or regime, and then the rest of their health needs just kind of follow. They start eating better. They start making sure that they're getting rest so they can really see the impact of their exercise. So make sure that you're taking care of your body, get sleep, get exercise, and eat right. Thank you so much for joining me with the Sensation Authenticity Genius Style. And I really want to talk to the ESFPs or the Sensation Authenticity people right now. You have special skills and talents that nobody else on the planet has, all right? So make sure you're doing everything you can to optimize who you are, to get yourself to the highest level of performance. Because we really want to see these talents be brought into the world, and you're the only one that can do it. So please just really focus on giving your gift to the world, and all of us truly appreciate it. All right, thank you very much.